Did you know that if you tie a baby elephant to a stake, so the stake is holding the elephant in place, that baby elephant will grow into a big elephant? And if you tie it to a stake, it won't even try to pull the stake out of the ground because it has already learned the reality of life that if you're tied to a stake, you can't move. And it doesn't question what it already learned to be true. These stories that I'm going to name in a moment, they have the same quality. And it's less about I intellectually know that I'm tied to a stake in the ground. And it's more about that stake is such a firm part of my reality that I don't physically feel like I can pull that stake out of the ground. Welcome to the Conscious Love Show. My name is Shane Kohler. I've spent over a decade helping women understand the unconscious patterns driving their relationships and what it actually takes to change them. I'm one of the most direct voices in the modern relationship space and the person who will tell you the truth that most coaches are afraid to name. This show is for anyone who's done settling, done shrinking, and done wondering why love keeps falling short. I'm not here to make you feel better about patterns that aren't serving you. I'm here to name them, help you understand them, and learn how to change them. If you're ready for that, I'm glad you're here. And let's get into it. Every single one of you is going to relate to at least one of the patterns I'm breaking down in today's episode. Because what I'm doing today is I am mapping out all of our origin stories. These are the core childhood experiences that fundamentally shape our relationships later in life. And what I'm doing today is I'm going to break these down one by one. You may relate to one or even more of them, but I'm going to break these down one by one. And then I'm going to tell you exactly how that origin is shaping your relationships with men in your life today. Now, each of the origin stories I'm naming today are directly correlated to one of the blueprints in my relational blueprint system. So as you're listening today, what I want you to do is listen for which one or two resonate most closely with you. And then after you're done, I want you to go take the quiz and find out which blueprint is yours. And I'll send you a personalized video breaking down that blueprint for you. So already today, I've been using the term origin story quite a bit. And I love using that term in relationship to what we're talking about here because superheroes have origin stories. And that speaks to the magical part of this work that I want to name before we really get into it is whatever that trauma or that pain that set the snowball rolling down the hill, whatever that is, it's not something bad that we want to overcome or a part of ourselves that we want to break or cut out or remove. It's something we want to integrate. It's something we want to heal through and have it become a fully expressed part of ourselves. And on the other side of that process, there's a literal superhero version of yourself waiting for you, right? Like our biggest pain is what actually becomes our greatest gift when it's expressed in a healthy way. So this origin that we're going to name today is not something you need to overcome or destroy or cut out of yourself. It's not a bad thing. What it is it's a part of yourself that is underdeveloped. It's a childhood part living inside an adult body, right? And now it's a childhood thing that's being expressed in adult relationships, and it's creating a mismatch for what's needed in that environment. But what that part of yourself needs is it needs love, it needs acceptance, it needs integration, it needs to become a fully expressed part of you rather than a judged and shamed and beaten down part of you. So as you're listening today, I want you to check in with that as well. Like, what is the gift in this pain? What is the gift in this trauma? What is the superhero expression of myself when this part of me is truly integrated? If it's creating one side effect in my relationships right now, what would the opposite side effect of that be? And that's the gift in what we're going to be talking about. As I was preparing for today's episode, I was thinking about an analogy I heard many years ago, and some of you may have heard this as well, but did you know that if you tie a baby elephant to a stake, so the stake is holding the elephant in place, that baby elephant will grow into a big elephant. And if you tie it to a stake, it won't even try to pull the stake out of the ground because it has already learned the reality of life that if you're tied to a stake, you can't move. And it doesn't question what it already learned to be true. These stories that I'm going to name in a moment, they have the same quality. And it's less about I intellectually know that I'm tied to a stake in the ground, and it's more about that stake is such a firm part of my reality that I don't physically feel like I can pull that stake out of the ground. It's not so much a conceptual thing. In fact, we often have the opposite problem where we conceptually think we can, but when push comes to shove, we revert to that same old model. And the reason we revert to that same old model is because while our mind is operating as a conscientious adult, our body and the neural pathways that were developed under stress at a young age are still stuck in that childhood place. And so, again, going back to what I said earlier, we are operating as a child in an adult world, just like that big elephant can't pull the stake out of the ground because it still is stuck in that childhood frame. That's what happens with us as well. So as I name each of these origin stories, what you're listening for is what was the childhood environment? What was the childhood context that developed my neural pathways? That in a moment of stress or a moment of tension, what is my nervous system reverting back to as its safe place? And I want to name this too, that a lot of you may have the very reasonable question, because if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably been into the work for some time now. You know your attachment style, you know all the things, and you're saying, I know my patterns, I can see my patterns, I know exactly what's happening, but I don't understand why I can't break the patterns. And the reason you can't break the patterns is because whatever that place of origin is, it's developed a certain physical experience in your body that tells you this is the only thing that's safe. And when you try to break out of that by walking away from a relationship or speaking an uncomfortable truth or any risk that you're taking in a relationship, there's a physical response in your body that says like danger, 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 because you learned a long time ago that that was not a safe thing to do. So that's what I'm going to be mapping out in today's conversation as I name each of these core origin patterns that were established. And the first one I want to talk about is the wound of inconsistent love. And so the childhood experience is that love was unpredictable. Sometimes there, sometimes not, never quite secure. And she learned to perform. She learned to read the room and be whatever was most likely to secure the love that felt perpetually just out of reach. And I have a lot of women who come into my program and they often ask me, they're like, I don't get why I am this way because I didn't have a traumatic childhood, right? Like I had loving parents. The environment was super supportive. I didn't have any kind of trauma that I can trace back to why I am this way in relationship. And I think that's a common thing that we assume that relational dysfunction is tied to specific trauma, but it's not tied to trauma. It can be, but it's tied to the patterns that we established as a safe place in relationship. And so what I'm naming about inconsistent love is it's not an absence of love. It's not like I was unloved or neglected or abused. It's that the love wasn't consistent. And this could be for so many reasons. It could be with parents who are preoccupied. It could be with parents who were very loving and supportive, but maybe they were struggling in the relationship, or maybe they were going through their own personal emotional issues, or maybe there was a lot of stress at work, or maybe the lifestyle and the demand was just so busy that they couldn't be fully present. And so you grow up knowing that you're loved. You grow up knowing that you're safe. You grow up feeling cared for. You grow up with parents who do everything they can to support you. But at the end of the day, you don't always know where or how you can get love. And it's worth naming as well that, of course, in the inconsistent love wound can be in a very unpredictable environment. Like I look at my mom who, in a lot of ways, there was a lot of trauma that happened with her, but she loved me. She was kind, but the environment wasn't healthy. Right. And so the love was there and she wanted to take care of me, but she didn't have the means to take care of me. We lived in extreme poverty. My mom was very insecure in herself and she leaned on religion as a huge crutch to make herself feel okay. And then there's a lot of religious trauma that came with that. And so it wasn't the absence of love, but it was the environment didn't allow the love to land safely. And there can be lots of examples of this, but the core theme here, it's not about whether you grew up in a healthy environment or an unhealthy environment. The core theme is that you didn't always know when or how you were going to get love. You didn't always know when or how you were going to get connection. And so you learned to perform for it. One of the best examples of this that my wife is in a new motherhood group right now, and she told me about this, and I thought this was really profound because I hadn't really thought about it like that. And obviously, doing the work I do, I know that as children we learn to perform for acceptance and belonging and things like that. But what I hadn't really understood was how subtle it is, and this is a great example. She said that if you're a child in a busy household and you suddenly start walking, and then all of a sudden your parents look at you and they go, "Oh my God, you're walking." And on a fundamental level, and we're talking at like such a young age. I mean, my daughter is 1 and she's already walking. So like we're talking about before 1, pre-verbal experience. You learn on such a fundamental level that when I do something people like, I get approval. And if that impression is landed with you over and over and over and over and over again throughout your entire childhood, your parents are busy, they're preoccupied, they're stressed, they're whatever, and you've got to constantly find something to do or something to perform to get their attention, to feel their loving gaze on you, that becomes a core relational blueprint. It becomes a core relational wiring. And as you go out into your life and you go out into your adult relationships, you start to fundamentally operate with people on that level. And what's important to understand here is this is not a conscious choice. Like most people don't feel like they're performing. I mean, maybe some people do, but I think a lot of people don't feel like they're performing or being inauthentic. They're just defaulting to what feels most natural to them. And that's one of the core characteristics of this wound, is because they're not being inauthentic, they're being who they've always known themselves to be. If anyone's ever seen, or if anyone watched Euphoria, the show, season 3 just completed a little while back, and I was watching season 3, and Cassie, who's a character on the show, there was this great discussion between Maddie and Cassie that I thought really highlighted this. And Cassie's like very, very clear expression of this wound that I'm talking about here. And she's like trying to do her social media and boost her brand and things like that. And Maddie, who's her friend, Maddie's a little more of a tough cookie, but Maddie's like, "You need to stop trying so hard. You look desperate." And Cassie's like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You need to do less and just practice being." And Cassie says, "Well, what am I being?" And Maddie says, "Just be yourself." And Cassie goes, "But who am I?" And when I saw that, it hit me so hard because I thought of this blueprint exactly. And I was like, that's exactly what it is. It's like, if I'm not performing for someone else, I have no idea who I am outside of that. If somebody tells me be yourself, I'm like, this is who I am. I am whoever you want me to be. I blend into whatever the environment calls for because since I was a child, that's what I had to do to survive. So for this particular archetype, it's like an identity outside of performance almost doesn't exist at all. And I say almost because it actually does exist. It's just very underdeveloped. And the practice for this person is to get really clear about what that identity is, about who they are when they're not performing for anyone else, but like what really matters to them. Because this is what ends up sabotaging their adult relationships later in life is they meet someone and, when you meet someone who has this pattern, they're lovely to be around because whatever you want, that's what they are. And I mean, in the beginning, it's amazing because you'll be anything I want you to be. Awesome. I can live out my perfect fantasy with you. But what starts to happen is over time, there develops a kind of an emptiness in the relationship. And I think for a woman who's in this pattern when she's with a man, what the man ends up feeling is like there's nobody there. There's like a void, an emptiness where I don't feel like I'm actually connected to anything. It's like fun for a while. Like you want to go here, you want to go there, you want to have sex, you want to do this, and everything's a yes. And it's like, this is wonderful. But then it never goes deeper than that. And there's a fundamental part of herself that he never gets to see because the truth is she probably never even lets herself see it. As I was saying, she may not even know it's there, or if she does know it's there, it's something that she keeps locked behind a door because her whole blueprint is built on the premise that what she wanted to be, nobody cared about. It was when she did something that met the expectations of others and they said, oh, wow, look at you go, that she said, okay, now I matter. Now I exist. And so for her to bring that to a relationship, it's like does she even know what that is? But if she does have an idea of what that is, for her to put that out in a relationship, somatically, like in her body, it feels like the threat of death. Because she's literally putting something out there that as far as she knows, nobody has ever wanted. And maybe it's important to name here too that like when we're children and we look to our parents, their love, their approval is everything. I mean, this is such a fundamental part of the human experience is that like that child without the love of that parent literally cannot survive. That child depends on that parent for everything. As a child, our parents are the biggest thing in the world to us. They're the only thing. They are the world. And all of our needs are placed in these people. And like, I mean, intellectually, I've known this, but I'm experiencing it with my daughter, and it's a phenomenal thing. And on a somatic level, that gets translated not as a preference or not as something that I would like or a nice thing to have, but as a literal necessity for survival. And so when that person is in relationship with someone and they're being asked to offer something that nobody has ever asked for, it's like, you want me to subject myself to death? That's why this is so deep. That's why, just to give an example, let's say a woman is in a relationship with a man and she has this archetype that I'm speaking about here, and she wants to ask him for a commitment. And as she goes to do that, her voice might literally be shaking. Her body might literally be shaking. Like she might feel a physical threat of death because what she's doing is she's actually interrupting that whole script. Like, her whole life has been about the relationship is what he wants. And if I perform what he wants for him, I'll be safe. I'll be okay. And then when she breaks that script, she's basically saying, like, if I'm asserting something I need as equally or more important than what he wants from the relationship, that would be like subjecting myself to total abandonment in childhood. That's how the body perceives it. That's how it feels inside the body. And so that's the wound of inconsistent love. When love is inconsistent, I have to constantly do something to earn it. I have to constantly try to seek it because I never know when or how or for how long I'm going to have it. And in relationship with a man, what that ends up doing is making him feel like there's no real relationship there. And that's what he ultimately pulls away from. The next wound I want to name is the wound of parentification or emotional management. And this is the child who had to be responsible for the adults. So I think of a client I had who her parents were both sick. Her mother was mentally unwell and her father was physically unwell her entire childhood. And she has 2 younger siblings. And so she had to basically raise her younger siblings and take care of her parents and take care of the house. At the time, she was like 8 years old. And that's one extreme example of it. But I mean, there are many examples of this. It could be if she had a younger sibling who had special needs, and that younger sibling absorbed all the energy of the household. It could be if she had a single parent who was working all the time and she had to fend for herself and her siblings. It could be if the parents were emotionally checked out or on some kind of substance or in a toxic relationship, and she felt like she had to emotionally tend to the parents' wounds. Or if there was a volatile household and she was the peacekeeper who always calmed everybody down, or, whatever form it takes. It could be all these various forms. But the idea is that as a child, she had to manage the household, whether she had to physically manage the household, whether she had to energetically manage the household, she was put in the manager or the parental role. And that means that she is never safe when someone else is in control. Right? For that child to give the parents or the someone else in the house control, it meant things were going to fall apart. And that's the blueprint that she carries into relationships. She has to make sure that she is always in control of what's happening. And this doesn't mean she's cold and hard. Often it's the opposite. I mean, if you think of that like older sibling caretaker archetype, or if you think of the emotional manager or the peacekeeper archetype, like these are not harsh, rigid people. These are actually very soft, kind, warm people. Right? So control can take different flavors. But often she controls by making sure everyone feels safe, by making sure everyone feels happy, by making sure everyone feels taken care of, by making sure nobody else has any stress. Like her whole archetype is built on the idea that she needs to make sure she neutralizes the stress in the room and she absorbs all that stress onto herself so no one else has to feel it. That's how she was able to feel safe. And so in relationships, when that translates, one of the most common ways this shows up is she always needs a partner whose capabilities are beneath her. She always needs a partner whose capabilities are beneath her because that's the position that she feels secure in. I remember a woman I used to work with, Liz Haber-Zambrano. She's a good friend and one of my mentors to this day. And she was sharing a story with me about how she would always date men who were below her standards or who were like fuck-ups, toxic guys. And she's like, I had to really investigate at some point why I was dating those kinds of men. And what I realized was I felt safe always being the one who was stable in the relationship. But I couldn't be with someone who was more stable than me. And this is the core vulnerability of that type of pattern, is if she's with someone who's more stable than her, now she has to actually rely on someone else. And if she relies on someone else, she could be let down. And so this woman will often find men who are projects. She might be the therapist or the emotional manager. She might be the mom person who, he sits at home and plays video games while she goes to work and makes dinner. She might be the financial manager for him, making sure his finances are in order. She might be the one calling therapists and dragging him to therapy appointments. And whatever the form it takes, on some level, she is unconsciously selecting for men who are going to make sure they never threaten her position of control. The obvious flip side of this is that she's often frustrated with the men that she ends up with. And she wonders, why can't I have a man who's more capable? Why do I need to be the mother to all of these men? And that's the paradox, is that if she were with the kind of man that she didn't have to mother, there would be a power battle in the relationship, because the very act of him being the provider, the very act of him being the stable one, would challenge her position, her psychological position that she needs to hold in the relationship. And when she looks back at her history, if she's ever been with a man like this, she can probably notice that that was a big problem. Because he ends up feeling like, I have no place to exist here. I have no purpose. I'm not needed. What I do doesn't matter. He feels emasculated. And this environment forces a man to self-select. Like, is he either going to become more childlike to stay with her, or is he going to say, I'm not dealing with this, and just withdraw? And so this type of pattern generally self-selects for men who are more passive, men who are more interested in being taken care of, because that gives her a familiar position that she can feel safe in a relationship. The third pattern I want to name is the pattern of being chronically misunderstood. And this is one, like, if you were to look at the attachment spectrum, it would land more on the avoidant side. But if you asked this person if they were anxious or avoidant, they would probably identify with being anxious. And this is where the blueprint system I've built is, it offers a level of insight that you can't really find through attachment theory, because attachment theory tends to name kind of broad spectrum patterns that are observable in mass scale. But this system I'm working with gets more into the root of the individual experience and what's actually happening there. And the chronically misunderstood person, this is someone who, whatever the circumstances, their childhood forced them to build an internal reality that is vastly different from their external reality. These people are often highly sensitive. This is why I said they might identify with being anxious rather than avoidant, because they don't feel like they avoid. They have this rich inner world. They're often deeply romantic. They're very sensitive. They fall hard and they love deeply, but they never let themselves out. And so in the other person's experience, it feels like they're avoidant because they're not actually available in the relationship, but they feel like they are because of how romantic and sensitive they are. It's a very interesting archetype, and I've identified this with a lot of women I've worked with. Actually, it's quite common, this one. And I mean, again, this could happen for so many reasons. So when we look at the circumstances of the childhood, it could be an environment where there were very rigid expectations for who they were supposed to be, and the only way they could be themselves was to force themselves inside. And so the external environment required them to be a certain way. Maybe there were certain, standards their parents held them to, or certain expectations they had in the household, and they had to be this sharp little girl and live up to all these standards, and they conformed to the external environment in order to survive, but they never lost touch with who they were on the inside. And so now there's this vast dichotomy between who they know themselves to be on the inside and who everyone experiences from them on the outside. This could be somebody who moved a lot. I know, I think I have some of this going on because I moved every year from kindergarten to fourth grade. I moved every single year, and I was sometimes multiple times in a year. And so I would be constantly starting a new school. I was always the new kid. And then from fourth grade to seventh grade, I was actually at the same school. And it's funny, I always thought I was not popular because I never fit in anywhere. And then in the 4 years that I was in my school, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. Yeah. In the 4 years I was in that school, I actually became quite popular. I had a lot of close friends. It was really interesting how that worked, because it wasn't that I didn't fundamentally belong. It was that I never stayed anywhere long enough to belong. There are many scenarios that could produce this kind of response, but the common theme is that the person feels ununderstandable. There's a distinct difference between who they experience themselves to be internally and who they express themselves to be externally. And there's a fundamental belief that people just don't get me. People just don't understand me. If I let people see who I am, they wouldn't like me. And there's this rich inner world with all these dimensions and all these dynamics, and they're very much in tune with who they are authentically, but they never let anybody see it. And interestingly enough, a woman who has this pattern will tend to attract avoidant men, even though she tends to be more on the avoidant side of the spectrum herself. And we typically think about anxious people attracting avoidant people and avoidant people attracting anxious people. But this is one of those scenarios where you could have an avoidant person with an avoidant person, because the thing about an avoidant relationship for this type is that the fact that the person isn't really trying to get to know her makes her feel safe. But then there's the internal struggle of this, where she has this rich romantic life. She has this deep longing for love. She has this deep need to really be seen, but she never lets it be expressed. And when somebody tries to dig into that, she withdraws, she pulls back. So there's this really painful internal struggle that I want to experience all of this, but I never actually let myself go far enough to experience it. One of the other ways this often shows up is this is the type that is most likely to remain single for long periods of time. And so if you have that friend who they just never really meet anybody, they never really go out much, they sit at home, maybe they read romantic novels or watch romantic movies, and they have a romantic heart, but they never really date. They never really get out there much. Or when they do date, it never really goes anywhere. They date a few people and they're like, it doesn't really feel right. Maybe they get into one long-term relationship here or there, and it's always with an avoidant person. And then they get out of it, and then they stay single for long periods of time. That is the textbook pattern for this type. The thing about this one is she's also the least likely of all these various blueprints to actually name that there is a pattern, because it's a very sophisticated defense mechanism that she's built, where she's hyper competent in her external life. She has a very rich inner world, and she tends to stay within the story of, I'm ready, I'm available, I'm open, I just haven't met the right person yet. And nobody ever measures up for various reasons, or when she does get with someone, they're, not ready or available for a relationship. But of all the various types, there's the least obvious thing to point to. Now, the final pattern I want to name here is the one who learned that love was dangerous. And this is the one who simply shuts down when somebody gets too close. They don't have this big internal conflict like, I want it, but it just doesn't feel right, or it's not like that. It's just like a hard no. There's like a complete dorsal shutdown when somebody gets too close to this person. And this is definitely on the avoidant side of the spectrum. We tend to think that avoidant people are like cold or harsh or emotionally shut down, but this is a completely different domain from even emotional availability, because often this person is very vivacious, very connected. They're very charismatic. They get along great with people, right? It's not like what you would think of an avoidant behavior. They can be very connected. They can be very emotionally available to a certain degree, but there's a certain internal line that when it gets crossed, something in them shuts down and they just say, nobody is crossing that line. And it's not because they're hiding themselves. In fact, they might let themselves be seen very clearly. They're not insecure in that way where they're like afraid of being seen. It's that if I let you get too close, you're going to hurt me. If I let myself feel too much here, I'm going to get hurt. This is the person in childhood who my wife has a good example, and I don't necessarily think my wife is this type, but she definitely has pieces of it. And my wife talks about how when she was young, she would try to crawl into her mother's lap and her mother would just push her out, say, get away from me. And that is the archetype that had to learn to be absolutely self-sufficient. That is the one that learned, I can't rely on anyone. There's no safe place to go to. When I reach out for love, I get hurt, I get rejected, I get abandoned. I'm alone. I'm the only person I can rely on. The doctors used to recommend the cry it out sleep strategy, right? They used to tell parents, you just got to let your child cry it out. And I wasn't aware of this until I had my own daughter and I started doing the research. I mean, obviously I've known for years that doesn't help form healthy attachment. But when I realized what that was actually about was that back in the Industrial Revolution, they needed parents to sleep at night so they could get up and go work in the factories the next day. And so this became the mainstream prescription that pediatricians would give parents because they needed parents to be sleeping at night so they could go out and work in the factories. It had nothing to do with the well-being of the children. And we have a whole generation of people whose parents were told to cry, let them cry it out in the crib. And these poor babies are literally completely alone all night in a dark room, crying themselves to sleep night after night after night without anyone coming to comfort them. And, my wife and I are working to sleep train our daughter in a conscious way. And, if she cries, we'll go in and soothe her. And we have various methods for doing that, but we don't leave her alone to figure it out by herself. That is, I think, maybe one of the reasons that this generation has such severe attachment issues is because it's a whole generation of people who were left to cry it out, and modern parenting is doing that less and less. But it's just, that's one example of how this could be formed. Or like I said, my wife's mother pushing her out of her lap or saying, get away from me. There are obviously a lot of men with this style. And the reason men have this way of relating is because young boys are taught from a young age to not be emotional, to not show their feelings. There's a kind of blanket numbness that young boys are trained on, that it's not manly or masculine to be emotional. And so young boys are constantly forced to shut that down to survive in communities of other young boys. But it's characterized by that absolute unwillingness to reach out, absolute unwillingness to be vulnerable, absolute unwillingness to rely on someone else, and complete self-sufficiency. And the thing about this person is they, just like all of us, they want love, they want connection. A lot of times avoidants get a bad rap where like, oh, those damn avoidants, they never want love. Like, no, these people do want love. And like I said, in many ways, this person might be very connected. They might be very emotionally available on a certain level, but there's a threshold of vulnerability that they don't allow themselves to cross. And so a man in relationship with this woman, what he would often experience is the kind of hot and cold, the I like you and then I don't. He on his end, it feels like playing games. It feels like she's not serious. And the tragedy of this type of person is she'll end up attracting a very passive man who will tolerate anything, who she has no respect for and she's not even attracted to, but he's the only man who will sit around and wait with her back and forth, and I don't know what I want and I feel something and then I don't, and I liked you yesterday but I don't like you tomorrow. Those types of things, any man with self-respect is going to withdraw from the connection. And so this woman is constantly pushing those type of men away, any man that she would actually respect. And she's drawing in very passive men who will pretty much tolerate anything. So of these four types, we have the wound of inconsistent love, where the person learned that they constantly had to perform to get the attention and the affection and the belonging of their caretakers and the people around them. There's the parentification or emotional management wound, where this person literally had to manage the environment. There's the chronic misunderstanding wound, where this person just felt isolated. They felt they had to live in their own world. They felt like nobody would really get them. Nobody would understand them. And then we have the love is dangerous wound, where these person have absolute self-reliance. They have a level of vulnerability that they just never cross with anyone, and they just never allow themselves to rely on or be touched by or be truly intimate with anyone. And each of these types have one thing in common. They all avoid secure, intimate relationships. This is one thing that I think attachment theory has really confused a lot of people about, because we have anxious on one side and avoidant on the other. And I understand that those are different behavioral models, but you've got to understand that every single type of insecure attachment is avoidant. Every single form of insecure attachment is basically avoiding the things that touch their insecurities. There's really only two categories. There's those who avoid love and those who are secure in love. And what I'm breaking down with these different blueprints are the different origin stories and relational structures that describe the different versions of avoidance. But you're either available for secure love or you're avoiding it on some level, whether you're avoiding it through an avoidant pattern, an anxious pattern, or the different variations that we've named here today. And I want to come back to this. I said it earlier, but it's important to come back to it, is that this is not a belief system. This is not a cognitive thing. In fact, a lot of us have tried to do so much work on rewiring our beliefs, and we have a whole new set of beliefs, but we have the same behaviors. Because the old way of thinking about it was that if I can identify exactly what I need to do, I can just force myself to do it. If I can believe the right thing about myself, I will naturally act in accordance with my beliefs. And that can be true for certain things. When your nervous system has a baseline level of safety, yes, then you can change your belief about something and you can act in accordance with a new belief. But when your nervous system doesn't have that baseline level of safety, you go into a physical survival response. You go into the default state that your nervous system says, this is safe. It's like I have a little rescue dog. We adopted her brother when he was a puppy, and then we adopted her from the breeder directly 3 years later. And it's so interesting to see the difference between the two. You know, the one who was raised in a safe environment and the one who was raised in a breeder home. And this is actually a good ethical breeder home, but it was very traumatic for her regardless. And she's, we've gotten her a lot of therapy and stuff because she's so traumatized and she has such strong reactions to things. But even to this day, if we start, oh, hi, Ivy, and we start trying to pet her and stuff, she'll like get down on her back and like curl up into the fetal position and kind of slowly roll over and show us her belly. And it's like she gets into this submissive position because it doesn't matter that she knows that we're safe. Like when she sees this big creature standing over her, she's immediately making herself small and submissive. It's like her nervous system is operating exactly on the blueprint that it has learned will keep her safe. It's just like the elephant with the stake. It doesn't matter how big or strong that elephant is. His nervous system learned that he can't move that stake, and he's operating according to his learned reality. And the patterns I'm describing today, these are our stakes that are keeping us tied to certain relational experiences. These become the invisible ceiling that on our best day we can blow past them, but on our worst day, we default back to them. And this is the reality of all intimate relationships, is at some point they become incredibly challenging. At some point, they push us to a level that our nervous system doesn't know how to cross. That's the nature of intimacy. That's why I love this work, is because, if I were doing business work or different types of coaching, there's definitely a level we can get into that. But nothing goes there the way intimate relationships do. Like my boss will never know me the way my wife does. Not that I have a boss, but you get the meaning, right? Like my colleagues will never know me the way my wife does. There's always a level of distance in that relationship that comes down with my wife, and my professional relationships will never reach me on the level that my marriage or my intimate relationships do. And that's the gift and the curse of our most intimate relationships, is if we're ready to shatter every piece of our defense structures, intimate relationships can lead us to some of the most beautiful, deep experiences. But if we're not ready to shatter those, we will reach a certain point and we will sabotage. Or we will reach a certain point and we will avoid. Or we will reach a certain point and become complacent, or we'll settle. But we will find some type of relational routine that allows our nervous system to remain in a state that we feel is safe. And so what I want to say is, if you've resonated with any of the 4 archetypes I've mapped in today's episode, I want to invite you to take the quiz. The quiz will tell you exactly what your blueprint is. It will name it for you. And like I said, I will send you a short breakdown video where I explain that blueprint to you in detail. And if you'd like to take it a step further, you can do this after you take the quiz, or you could do it right now if you want to. I will leave the link in the show notes. But if you want to go one step further with this, you can actually book a personalized blueprint audit with my team, where we will sit down and review that blueprint with you, and we will map out a personalized healing path for you using the anchor system, which is the system I've developed to work directly with each of these unique blueprints based on nervous system education. So we're not working with the cognitive mind or the rational mind, but we're working with how these impressions live in the body and the actual physical responses that you have to things that happen in relationships that feel threatening to you. And we're working with those actual experiences in real time. So if you identify with one of these patterns, you want to take it a step further, go ahead, book that audit with my team. Again, I'll leave the link in the show notes below. And that's where we can sit down with you, use the anchor system to actually map out a personalized healing path for you. So take some time to reflect on what surfaced for you in today's episode, what patterns you recognize, how that's showing up in your life. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for being with me this week. I'll leave the links you need in the show notes below, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care. Bye. Is there something you'd like to sit down and talk to me about face-to-face? If so, here's how we can do that. Every week, I open my schedule for 1 or 2 private calls with potential clients. And if it's your first time meeting with me, I offer that session at a discounted rate of $250. Go to inspiredloveapproach.com/private coaching to book that session now, or just click the link in the show notes. And if you still don't know what your relational blueprint is, make sure to take the quiz and find out. You can find the link below as well. And after you take the quiz, I'll send you a personalized video breaking down your blueprint in detail. If you enjoy the Conscious Love Show, the best way you can support us is to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. It helps improve the ranking and get the work out to more people. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you next time.